Hey guys, it's Robin, RSI Crafts, and welcome to my craft room. If you've been watching my Whip It Wednesday video, you've seen that last week I made a baby quilt with the sick animals and that blue-green fabric, and I used a snowball design for it. I went ahead and I made another one. This one has these cute little fun insects on it with this nice bright yellow background, and I used this mottled green to go with it for my little snowball corners. I'm sure the camera seems to be washing the color out quite well. But this is a nice green grass, and this is the nice bright yellow with all the different bugs on it. Yeah, it's even a little bit darker than this, but it's, like I said, it's a nice color. So what I thought this week is I thought I would show any of the new people who have never made a snowball block how to make one. And then for those of you that have already seen a snowball block, then maybe you can go ahead and get a refresher. See if I can get all this extra color out of here and stop it from washing out too much. That helps a little bit. Right here is our snowball block, and it has to do with a square of fabric, and then we do stitch and flip squares on the four corners. So let's go ahead and get started on this, and I'll just walk you through the process so you can see how I made them. Now, snowball blocks can be made out of any size. The one that I made last week with the sick animals on it was a 12.5-inch block. This week I went with a 9.5-inch block because I wanted to just see what it looked like a little bit differently in a smaller block. You can go down as small as you want, but after you get past maybe a 5-inch square or 4-inch square, it starts to get really, really small and tiny, and then your corners are going to be really tiny. So it depends on what you have for fabric, whether or not that small of a size will work for you. I think the 9.5-inch one is working really good. With this baby quilt, I went and did a 4x4 grid. So I have 4 blocks across and 4 down, and that gives me a 36x36 basically size quilt, which is kind of a good one for a small blanket for a baby to take in a stroller or a car ride, or just to lay on the floor for them to roll around and play on. As they get bigger, you may need a bigger one, but kids, even babies, as they start to grow, they change what things they're interested into, and sometimes you want to change up quilts. Start with a small one and you can work your way up. Now, there is a formula that you can use to decide what size squares to make for your corners. And I have, there's a good representation of my green. So I have my corner squares all cut out. And you can, like I said, you can make them any size you want. But if you want to go with the basic formula, I found one online. And it says what you do is you take your finished block size. Now my block I cut at 9.5 inches, and with the seam allowance it's going to go ahead and finish at 9 inches because you're going to have a 1/4 inch on each side all the way around for your seam allowance. So my finished block sewn into a quilt is going to be 9 inches. You take that finished size and you divide it by 3. I couldn't find out why you divide it by 3. Maybe because it's considered like a 9 patch, because as you're putting these in the corner, that gives you 1, 2, 3. I'm not really sure, but that's the only thing I can come up with. But if I take the 9 and I divide it by 3, then that gives me 3, because 3 times 3 is 9. And then you add in the seam allowance, so add in a 1/2 inch. So my 9.5-inch block that I cut, which is sewn in at 9 inches, divided by 3, add a 1/2 inch, I cut my squares at 3.5 inches. That's really simple. There's a variety of charts you can find online for it. Let me see if I can go ahead and link to one down there if I find it again. But it's simple math. You just divide it by 3. You kind of round up if you're doing something strange, like if you're doing a 10-inch block, you might have to round it up. Like I said, let me find that chart for you. It had a whole bunch of different sizes. But the one I'm working on, I cut my center fabric, my novelty fabric. Great use for something if you have a big print, something with large flowers, or large type of novelty animals, or like if your kids are into Blue's Clues or something and you have a big picture like that, you can go ahead and cut your blocks large enough to encapsulate that so you can see it. And if you just have regular fabric, you might want to cut them smaller, maybe do the 6.5 inches. But I had a nice amount of animals, and I like the amount of yellow with a little bit of green, so I've got this at 9.5 and this at 3.5. The next step is to go ahead and take all of your squares and draw a line down the center. Now sometimes you can go ahead and just press it in half if you don't want to draw the line, and then you'll have that nice crease down the center, because we're going to go ahead and stitch right down this center marking. So whether you're going to follow the line or you follow a crease. There's also those easy rulers, I believe they're called, where you stick it to your sewing machine bed and it has you line up on these lines and grids and stuff, so you can just send it through the machine like this. But for most people that don't have that, where I'm just draw a line right through, I had 16 blocks times 4, so I had a lot of blocks to cut and to draw lines on, but it's okay. I just took a few moments, took out my little ruler and just drew my straight line. You can use any type of tool you want. I just use a regular ink pen. I would try to avoid maybe a Sharpie because you don't want it to bleed through, even though it will be in your seam allowance. I just try to stay away from things like that. A lot of times a mechanical pencil is all you need, but I wanted to make sure you guys could see the line. Now when I stitch these on my sewing machine, I stitch them assembly line, just one right after the other. So you want to put them on your corners so that they're going to go like this. And what we're going to do is when we stitch down this line here, this is going to end up flipping back like this. And that's where we're going to get our snowball block. So I did about 4 or 5 blocks at a time. You can use a pin to hold this down if you want. I just set the one on there. I would pin it on this section because this is a section we're going to end up cutting away. So I just put it through and I stitched this one through. Then I had my next one and I put it through and I just stitched this one through and I just kept doing them. And then on my next pass, I spun it around so I would do the next corner. The only thing you need to really take care of here is you want to make sure that as you're stitching these down, that all of your squares are going to be going in the same direction. You don't want to accidentally stitch it. I guess it would be a little bit hard to stitch it weird, because if you were doing it this way, you'd be going into the block. So you just need to make sure that they're all in the corners and you're stitching them all this way so that when you flip it back, you're going to end up with your snowball block. And that's how it'll end up looking. Let me show you one I've already stitched. I went ahead and I just used a neutral thread so you really can't see it, but you can still see where my line is. I went and stitched these all down. One of the things you can do to check before you cut this to make sure, because we're going to end up cutting this excess fabric away so we don't have that extra bulk, is I like to take this and I like to just fold it over, and I want to make sure that it doesn't end up looking like this. You want to make sure that this is going to cover this entire yellow block underneath. Because before you cut anything off, if you see it only goes like this, then you want to make sure you unpick this, get out your little seam ripper and start over. And make sure that all 4 of them are going to go ahead and either go to this outer edge or past it. Now, if they're all going past it, it's not too bad. But if you just have one that goes way far past it, then you're probably going to need to take that one off and restitch it also. For those of you that like to do half square triangles, you get a bonus half square triangle here that if you go ahead and take this back to your sewing machine and a 1/2 inch from this line, you go ahead and stitch it, then you'll be able to get your bonus half square triangle, and then you'll have your stitch and flip little corner right here. For those of you that don't even want to worry about that, you just want to get rid of these and toss them away, you're just going to take your ruler. You could cut these with scissors. You need to have the 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can just take scissors and walk it right off. But I like to go ahead and set my ruler on here, and I line up my 1/4 inch. I have one of those 6.5 inch rulers that have that 1/2 inch, so it shows you the 1/4 inch mark here. I just like to line my 1/4 inch mark up on there, and then I would just take my rotary cutter and cut it off. Now I've been making the bonus half square triangles and stitching these when I do it. And since I stitch mine a 1/2 inch away, that leaves me the 1/4 inch seam allowance on here, and it also leaves me the 1/4 inch seam allowance on this. And then I can go ahead and just press this open. These are all generally about the same size. I can double check them, just trim off the dog ears, and you're good to go. I went ahead and took this to my machine and I stitched that second line. You see how it is a 1/2 inch away from the previous line. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut down the center of this. I know that it's a 1/2 inch, so I will line my 1/4 inch up along here. And then when I cut it, it'll split the difference, and each side will have the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and it'll be all set to go. Sometimes if you're not really measuring it or you're just eyeballing it, you might have a little narrower seam allowance. You want to be careful. You definitely don't want to go lower than 1/8 of an inch. A little bit smaller than a 1/4 inch is okay, but you don't want your seams to come unraveled in the quilt. So I'm just going to line up my 1/4 inch on that sewn line and whack these corners off. And after you cut them all off, it'll look like this. I just took my iron and I pressed them out to the side. That way I was taking my darker fabric, instead of pressing it into the color, I just pressed it out to the side. And that's your basic snowball block. As I said, you can make it in any size you want. You can make one large quilt. I would definitely make larger corner squares. So the snowball block is a great block for beginners. As you can see, it's really simple. You could put any size blocks in the corner, or you can go with the divide it by 3 method. So as you can see, a snowball block is a great block for a beginner just to get started. This way you're not sewing just squares together. You can have a little bit of a contrast with your colors. It kind of frames it out a little bit. As you can see with my block, oh, there we go again. There we are. It leaves these little on point, they're not diamonds, but they're squares on point. So you add that little extra bit of color in there. You can choose different fabrics to use or use the same ones all the way around. And for someone who's experienced, then it's a really simple block too. If you need to push out a quilt really quick for a gift, for a baby that you just found out you need to go to the baby shower, or your husband just told you so-and-so had a baby, do you have a quilt ready? These are generally really quick to just put together and whip them out in an afternoon. This is one of those quilt in a day type ones where you can finish it in a weekend, get the top going in one day, get it quilted and bound on the next day, and you'll have a gift ready. And for my upper level patrons, you'll be seeing an extended video of this coming up in the next few days. So as always, if you have any questions, please go ahead and leave them down in the comments. I or one of the other people that are watching this video, I'm sure will jump in and help you out if you have any questions. Sometimes it takes me a little bit to get to them, and sometimes I'm right on the ball. It depends on what's going on in my day. Please let me know down in the comments if this is a block you've tried before, or is this something new for you. I like how fast they go together, and it's great for showcasing some of the busier fabrics, maybe for a Halloween or a Christmas quilt or a table runner. You can make your block smaller and then make a nice little table runner. And that way you won't have to cut up any of your fabrics, because sometimes they have like animals or people, and you really don't want to be chopping heads off. So the bigger block like this is good to showcase those fabrics with the larger prints. So until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.